welcome to the first ever official cats versus dog competition. It's an argument as old as time. Who's better, dogs or cats? It's a valid argument and one that's difficult to judge. What are we even testing? Looks? Fluffiness? Ability to sneak up on its owner without them knowing?
You're right, it's pretty overwhelming. So today we'll test a variation of it. Let's do whose eyesight is better. That's a good one.
It's the ultimate battle of the eyeballs. We have some tests, but more importantly, some adorable competitors. We have our dog Peanut, the Chihuahua,
And Maggot the cat. So let's get this foursome competition underway.
That was terrible. Let the competition begin.
Let's kick it off with night vision. Who can see better in the dark?
Well, all dogs and cats have a tapetum, which is a reflective tissue at the back of their retina. It acts like a mirror, bouncing light back and forth between the receptors to help them see in the dark. It's what gives them that creepy glow in their eyes at night. But who's actually better at seeing in the dark?
We can test this using optic equipment to have a look at the tapetum and the glow at the back of the eye, but we will need to be in complete darkness to test it. So let's go somewhere dark. So we'll look at Peanut's eyes first. The optic is a special eye equipment. It shines a light through to the back of the eye, and we see a reflection of the tapetum there. Okay, Peanut, you ready? Dogs and cats have bigger pupils, so that allows more light to reach the back of the eye so they can see better in the dark. The cat's oval-shaped pupil allows more light into the back of the eye, and this lets them see better in the dark compared to dogs.
And the winner of this round is...
Drum roll, please.
Cats!
Well done, Maggot. It's their specialized oval pupils and the large eyes that let maximum light in the dark.
Off to the next round.
In terms of color vision, dogs and cats are pretty even.
It's a myth that dogs and cats can't see color. They actually have less color receptors at the back of their eye, so they can't see the difference between green and red.
The big difference, though, between dogs and cats is their field of vision. Dogs, cats and humans have eyes at the front of their face together side by side, so this allows them to see what's clearly in front of them. They have what we call binocular vision. This doesn't mean that they have binoculars for eyes. It means that both eyes work together to form one image.
And introducing our wild card entry, Charlotte the rabbit. Now, rabbits have eyes at the side of their head, so that means that increases the field of her vision, and she can see animals creeping up behind her.
Humans, dogs and cats are all great at detecting and seeing moving objects.
Humans are good at seeing moving objects in bright light. Dogs and cats, particularly cats, are better at seeing moving objects at night.
Dogs have an excellent sense of smell, so a lot of what they perceive in the world is dependent on their smell.
Overall, there's no clear winner.
They all have their strengths and weaknesses, but when it comes to cuteness, they're all winners.
A really cool thing about horses is their eyes. They have the largest eyes out of all land mammals. Come on, Willow. Each eye is on the side of their head, so they have amazing vision and can see different things to each side. It's called monocular vision. Horses' eyes are like a high-tech camera. They see everything in a wide view, which is pretty handy when they're spotting danger. The other really cool thing about horses' eyesight is they can switch from monocular vision to binocular vision, which is like ours. So they can focus on one thing using both eyes. Despite their cool ability to switch between monocular and binocular vision, they do have some blind spots. One right in front of their forehead and another behind, just beyond the tail. That's why you should never approach a horse from behind or you might spook it. And as terrifying as I might be, I'm going to try and not spook those horses and get back in the saddle for another ride.
You were getting very sleepy. Very sleepy. You were going to fall asleep. Yes, my hypnosis worked. Okay, you can get up now if you want. That's coming up today on Get Clever.
All right. Yeah, that's a good one. All right. Oh, wait. Okay, I didn't see you all there. I was not taking selfies on social media. I was actually researching the human eye.
I'm just here to hang out. Over to you, Thomas.
The human eye works a bit like a camera. We see because the light that reflects off an object we're looking at goes into our eye, and then our eye uses that light to make an image. But how do our eyes actually make this image?
I don't know.
Well, first, the light has to pass through the cornea of the eye. The cornea is a clear curved layer situated right in front of the eye. Light passes through here. This is the first step of the image making process. Next up, light has to pass through the pupil of the eye. The pupil is a round hole that allows light to pass through to the innermost part of the eye. It is that dark circle that we all notice when we stare into someone's eyes, located in the middle of the iris. The iris is the color part of our eyes and is actually a muscle, adjusting the pupil size, making it larger or smaller to control how much light can enter.
This is all very eye-opening.
The light then passes through the lens of the eye. The lens is a clear, oval-based structure that can change shape and focus the light so that that image can be relayed to the back of the eyeball. And here's the interesting part. The lens sends an upside-down image of the thing we're looking at to the back of our eyeballs. So how come we don't see things upside down? Just wait and see. The lining on the back of our eyeball is called the retina. This is where the upside-down image comes to. Now, the retina is made of millions of cells that are very sensitive to light. The retina is connected to the brain by the optic nerve, which is located to the back of the eye. When the light hits these light-sensitive cells, it gets converted into an electric signal that goes from the optic nerve to the brain. Sorry about that, Nigel. Our brain then converts the upside-down image into what we see. It actually will flip it the right way up again.
Oh, my brain is not working. Ooh, that's better.
And that's how I'm able to see these amazing photos. What a handsome devil. Right, Nigel?
Hi, I'm Dr. Graham Walker. I'm a science communication researcher and academic here at the Australian National University. We actually teach students to communicate science, to take science out and make it exciting, make it fun, make it interesting for all kinds of different people. Today we're going to have a look at some of the properties of liquid nitrogen. You probably know this stuff is freezing cold, minus 196 degrees, but we're going to be looking at one of the other properties of liquid nitrogen, the fact that it'll boil at room temperature. As it boils, it can make some big pushing forces. What I mean is we're going to blow some stuff up. So we're going to get some of the liquid nitrogen out. It's really cold, so I've got my gloves on, I've got my eye protection. Okay, you can't get liquid nitrogen at home, but if you do, never try this at home. If you want to use liquid nitrogen, come and study here at the ANU. We'll teach you to use it safely. Okay, let's get some of the nitrogen out. So we're pouring some of the liquid nitrogen out, and it is very cold. You can see some fog there. You might think it's smoke. It's not. What we can see here is the fact that the liquid nitrogen is so cold that any water vapor in the air condenses. That means it turns back into a liquid, these little droplets of what is basically a cloud. Okay, super cold. But what we're going to do with the liquid nitrogen relies on another property of nitrogen. It has a very low boiling point. If I pour some of the nitrogen into this special science jar, you see it's going in as a liquid, but once it's inside the jar, it starts boiling and turning into a gas. We can see that it's turning into a gas because it's filling up this balloon. So we've got a liquid in here and a gas in there. Guys, I think this is about to go wrong. Okay, so we've got our liquid in here, our gas in here. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. The reason it gets bigger is that when the nitrogen's a liquid, all the little bits of nitrogen, we call them molecules, they're all packed tightly together. But as they turn into a gas, they spread out. And once they're all spread out, they get bigger. And eventually our balloon pops. This is the science that's going to power our cannon. All right, so you all saw what happened with that balloon. Now we're going to change the experiment slightly. What we're going to do is we're going to put our liquid nitrogen in here, and just like you saw before, it's going to boil and turn from a liquid into a gas. But we're not going to let that gas escape. We're going to put the lid on, okay? What I want you to do at home is make a guess or make a prediction. We call them a hypothesis, okay? In science, when we do an experiment, we're testing our guess. The way we're going to test it is with this monkey cannon. All right, get that lid on nice and tight. Once that lid's on tight, the gas has got nowhere to go. Have a think about what's happening in the bottle. That gas is getting more and more squashed. It's pushing harder and harder and harder on the edge. Soon, it's going to push hard enough to pop the bottle. So you can see our stunt monkey has survived the experiment, but the bottle certainly hasn't. These bottles, hugely strong. It doesn't actually pop till the pressure inside is about 5 times as high as the pressure of a car tyre, and that's a lot of pressure. Enough pressure to push the bottle open from the inside, and it ends up like this. We're going to make this slightly more exciting by putting our bottle in this explosion-proof bin and do an experiment I call the teddy bear volcano. Of course, it involves these teddies. Now, I know you might be a little bit worried at home, but don't worry, these aren't regular teddies. These are highly trained science stunt teddies. So don't worry about the teddies. I promise you they can bear it. Wow, so you can see what's happened to the bottle. Just like last time, that pressure inside has pushed hard enough to open up the bottle from the inside and push all our teddies up. Now, you might be looking at this going, well, what use is this kind of science? But this is exactly the same idea that makes a steam engine go, except in a steam engine, we've got boiling water, not boiling nitrogen. And you can see why we equip our bears with safety gear. Look at this jacket, okay? Totally torn. It's pretty exciting, especially for the teddies. In fact, this one scared the pants off it.
Have you ever heard the saying, eyes are the windows into your soul? It's suggested that by looking into someone's eyes, you can tell what they're thinking and how they're feeling. Let me look into your eyes. I think you're thinking, you want to eat my shoes? You want to lick my face? She needs to pee? What?
Want to learn how to build this awesome clock? Pretty cool, huh? This awesome pattern is a moire pattern. It happens when 2 identical patterns are overlaid to create an optical illusion. An optical illusion is basically our brain being tricked. When the patterns aren't overlapped, they look like this. Just simple lines repeated with clear space in between. You can build your own with some transparency paper, gloss paper, thin card, a new or recycled clock movement, some double-sided tape, and a craft knife. First step is to create your patterns. You can either do this by hand or using a computer. Make a hole in the center of the clock face. just being really careful to keep your fingers away from the knife's edge. And poke the clock movement through the hole. And you might need to neaten up that edge once you poke the movement through. And then it's just the washer and the nut, and that's going to hold the clock face down. Then slide the minute and hour hands on. Okay. Find the center of your transparency pattern, and with the second hand, make a little hole and poke it through. And place them both onto the movement. Try not to bend the second hand, be nice and gentle. And patterns will appear as your clock rotates. And then, hang up your hypnotic handiwork and have the time of your life.
So what would you think if I told you that plain old boring white light is actually all the colours mixed together? To explain what I mean, I'll use a colour wheel. I painted this up the other day using blue, yellow and red, and all the colours in between were mixed by using those colours. So of course I need this colour wheel, some string and scissors. The first step is to use your pair of scissors to make 2 holes in the middle of your colour wheel. Now make sure you have an adult around because scissors are sharp. You might need to flip it over just to make sure your holes are punctured all the way through. And next you need to grab your string. Make sure you have a long piece. I've got it about 1 metre long. Now you need to thread it through the 2 holes in the colour wheel. So thread through one side and pull it out. And do the same with the other end. Once they're both through, we're going to make a big loop. So we need to tie the 2 ends off. I'm going to do a double knot so it's nice and secure. Okay, let's give it a spin. It's time to see if all these colours combined will look white. So we've got to wind up our colour wheel. It's kind of like using a skipping rope. Pull tight. It's white. Why are you doing that? You're really annoying me, colour wheel. So even though there's all these beautiful bright colours on the wheel, it looks white because our brains can't keep up with the important information fast enough as the wheel is spinning. All these colours combined will look white. Cool, hey? Why don't you give it a go?
Like that? Are we best friends? Yes. I'm trying to do a cuteness test to figure out which the cutest dog here is, but I've been a little bit distracted. This is all I've been able to come up with. I'm not really sure how scientific that was, but... Has anyone ever told you you'll get square eyes from looking at a TV for too long? Well, you won't literally have eyes all turned to squares, as funny as that would be. But your eyes can be affected and strained if you look at a TV for too long. The warning about sitting too close to a TV comes from the 1960s when colour TVs were first invented. An American company released a TV that released a small amount of bad radiation. But don't worry, they don't anymore. But the warning about it is still around today. Even though staring at a screen isn't going to give you square eyes, it can cause your eyes to be strained. Staring at a screen for too long may cause your eyes to get tired and may even cause a headache. Your eyes can get pretty dry staring at a monitor for too long because you don't blink as much. Even though staring at a TV won't change the shape of your eyes or cause severe damage, optometrists, which are doctors that check the health of your eye, recommend taking frequent breaks or using the 20-20-20 rule. Every 20 minutes, look 20 feet away, which is about 6 meters for 20 seconds, so don't strain your eye muscles too much. Well, that's about time for my 20-minute break. Vache out.